When a public figure chooses to live out loud, sharing heartbreak, triumph, faith, and even their most fragile moments with the world, audiences begin to feel entitled to the full story. Not parts of it, not curated chapters, the entire narrative. And when one chapter feels sealed off, guarded, protected, unexplained, it doesn't just create curiosity, it creates suspicion. That's the tension at the center of this story. Because in an age where celebrity lives are documented in real time, where milestones are posted before they're processed, and where transparency has become currency, silence stands out. And when silence stands out, people start filling in the blanks themselves. What began as admiration slowly shifted into analysis. Analysis turned into scrutiny, and scrutiny evolved into something far more complicated. The real question isn't just what happened, it's why the absence of certain details has become louder than any confirmation ever could be.
There is a paradox that observers can't ignore. On one hand, deeply personal grief was shared openly, almost immediately. Words, emotions, vulnerability, all placed in the public square without hesitation. Yet another profoundly intimate chapter was handled with near total privacy. And that contrast is what unsettled people. Because when someone builds a brand on openness, followers begin to associate visibility with authenticity. So when visibility disappears during a major life event, it feels inconsistent. But is that fair? Public figures are still human. They are allowed boundaries. They are allowed sacred moments. The complication arises when those boundaries don't align with the public persona that preceded them. Audiences begin to ask whether privacy was a principle or a selective choice, and once that question enters the conversation, it becomes difficult to silence. It's not about entitlement to someone's life, it's about expectation, and expectation, when disrupted, creates doubt.
What often ignites large online debates isn't a massive revelation, it's a small detail, a name, a date, a discrepancy that seems insignificant at first glance. In this case, observers fixated on something that might otherwise have been dismissed as administrative routine, but context changes perception. When a public identity is tightly linked to a married name, seeing a different name attached to a critical document raised eyebrows. Was it timing? Was it paperwork? Or was it something deeper? No one had definitive answers, and that vacuum became fertile ground for interpretation. The internet has a unique ability to magnify minor inconsistencies into central talking points. What might have been an ordinary technicality became symbolic. It represented to some a crack in the narrative, and once a crack is perceived, even if it isn't real, people begin searching for more.
Speculation rarely stays confined to private group chats. Eventually, it reaches voices with platforms, commentators, analysts, influencers, each adding their own framing, their own tone, their own emphasis. And framing matters. The difference between some people are asking questions and sources are suggesting is subtle but powerful. Once commentary enters the mix, narratives accelerate. They become less about isolated observations and more about constructed storylines. It's not necessarily malicious. Sometimes it's curiosity. Sometimes it's content economics. But amplification changes everything. A theory repeated enough times begins to feel credible, even if it remains unverified. The echo chamber effect strengthens belief. Doubt becomes conviction. And before long, speculation transforms into assumed reality in certain corners of the internet. That shift is subtle, but it carries enormous consequences.
When tragedy strikes, timelines matter. People instinctively search for sequence. Where was everyone? Who knew what and when? But memory under stress is fragile. Accounts can differ without deception. Yet in a hyper-digital age, inconsistencies are dissected frame by frame. In this case, reports about locations and movements didn't align neatly in the public mind. That alone was enough to spark debate. It's important to remember that chaotic moments rarely unfold cleanly. Details get misremembered. Information evolves. Still, observers saw gaps, and gaps, once again, invited interpretation. The human brain craves coherence. When the story doesn't feel linear, we try to make it linear. We build bridges between disconnected points. Sometimes those bridges are accurate. Sometimes they are entirely imagined.
but the drive to connect them is relentless. From there, conversation drifted into even more personal territory. The absence of visible documentation led some online voices to float theories about alternative paths to parenthood. Surrogacy, secrecy, hidden arrangements, ideas that often surface around high-profile families. It's a pattern seen before in celebrity culture. When proof isn't displayed publicly, assumption fills the void. But assumptions are not evidence. They are reflections of suspicion, and suspicion tends to grow in environments where information feels incomplete. The theory itself became less important than what it represented, the belief that the public had been presented with a partial truth. Whether that belief had merit or not almost became secondary. What mattered was the momentum behind it. And once a narrative gains momentum, stopping it becomes nearly impossible. There's a critical line between questioning a public narrative and constructing an alternative one. At some point, speculation shifts tone. It moves from curiosity into implication. That shift is subtle but significant. When personal theories begin intersecting with larger events, the emotional weight intensifies. What was once online chatter becomes deeply consequential. This is where ethical tension emerges, because suggesting hidden motives or undisclosed realities tied to painful events carries real-world impact. Reputations can be reshaped, not by proof, but by repetition. And in the digital era, repetition is powerful currency. The internet doesn't require verification to sustain a theory. It only requires engagement. That's a sobering reality.
So, why does this happen? Why do audiences become so invested in uncovering hidden layers? Psychologists have long noted that humans are pattern seekers. We are uncomfortable with ambiguity. When someone lives publicly, we subconsciously believe we have enough data to understand them fully. And when something doesn't fit, we assume there must be something concealed. Add fame, influence, and tragedy into that equation, and the desire for a complete narrative intensifies. It's not always rooted in malice. Often, it's about closure. People want stories to make sense. They want beginnings, middles, and ends that align. When reality resists that structure, speculation steps in to force it.
In the end, this story may say less about one individual and more about the culture surrounding visibility itself. When someone shares selectively, audiences debate authenticity. When someone shares everything, audiences question motive. The balance is nearly impossible. The deeper issue isn't whether every rumor holds truth. It's how quickly questions evolve into conclusions. In a world where everyone can analyze, comment, and amplify, the boundary between inquiry and accusation grows thinner by the day. And perhaps the most unsettling part is not the unanswered questions, but how comfortable we've become rewriting narratives in real time.